Welcome back. In today's video, I will be covering a video from HighWire with Bigtree, a known anti-vax proponent who makes fairly regular videos against vaccinations and quote-unquote big pharma. This video is called Debunking Measles Mania with Dr. Bob Sears. Take it away, Del.
You know, I think back in our history lessons in school and the famous story when Paul Revere raced to the streets screaming, "The redcoats are coming, the redcoats are coming." And I wonder if the new battle cry we will all have to scream as we run to the streets is, "The lab coats are coming, the lab coats are coming." What's happening in this world? What am I talking about? I'm talking about measles mania. Take a look.
Growing measles outbreak prompting a state of emergency in Washington state.
A state of emergency has been declared in Washington state where 35 cases of the infection have now been confirmed.
Now, a dozen schools, a Costco, and Portland's airport join a growing list of locations exposed to measles, which can be fatal.
Cases also reported around Portland, Oregon, an area considered an anti-vaccination hotspot.
I just ran that. I didn't even edit it. He's showing the most recent news coverage of measles outbreaks, which state right in it can be fatal to children. And he'll be spending the video trying to debunk certain so-called myths about measles.
Well, there you have it. 35 people in Washington have made international news. They're like a rock band skyrocketing to the top. This is better than Milli Vanilli after winning an award for best song. I guess I'm dating myself there. But these 35 people somehow are making it onto every news station in the world for having gotten what I thought was a trivial childhood illness.
Trivial? Well, let's look at it for a second there, bucko. Measles symptoms show up after about 2 weeks and last a little over a week. The first symptoms are simple things you'd expect of a flu: fever, runny nose, cough, and red eyes. But as it progresses, the whole body is covered by a rash a few days later, as shown in the shots from earlier in your video. Now, fairly commonly, the patient can suffer from diarrhea, ear infections, and pneumonia. Pneumonia affects about 6% of patients, but pneumonia in young children or people with compromised immune systems can be fatal. Less commonly, the patient can suffer from seizures, blindness, and/or encephalitis, which is an infection that causes brain swelling. As well, the disease can suppress the immune system of the patient for weeks to months, making them more susceptible to other diseases. Sadly, children are the most likely to die from it, especially those 5 years old and under. In 2017, 110,000 people died from the disease worldwide. So let's hear your nonsense about this case, shall we?
But before we get into that story, I want to talk about measles really quickly. You know, we sort of brush over this, and so I want to get to the medical facts around measles. And to do that, I'm bringing in world-renowned pediatrician Bob Sears to join me.
I like how you called this man world-renowned. Dr. Bob Sears is a pediatrician from Capistrano Beach, California. He's the author of the book, The Vaccine Book, Making the Right Decision for Your Child, published in 2007, where he tries to make the case for delaying or even denying children vaccines, and is a known anti-vax supporter. So well known, in fact, he was recently put on 35 months probation that would see his medical license revoked for charging parents to write letters excusing them from immunization shots. He would sell these letters to parents who wanted to avoid vaccinations without actually examining the child or having access to their records. It's a flat-out lie, and he claims no wrongdoing, claiming that he should be able to believe the parents in the matter and not actually test the child. Don't want your child to get a vaccine, regardless of why? Just send him a check. The probation started in July last year, so at the time this video was made in February, he was still on probation for these charges. So he may face having his medical license revoked for actions like engaging with this show. He's not renowned. If anything, he's renounced.
See if you can read this.
But let's continue.
Bob, I know you're at your office right now and you got someone coming in just a few minutes, but can we go over what measles is to begin with? What is measles? How dangerous is it?
Well, yeah, measles is actually a benign childhood illness for almost everyone who catches it. 99.9% of cases are ultimately harmless. And
now, that statement is mostly accurate. 0.2% of cases are fatal. The issue is that it's mostly fatal for children under 5, the elderly, and pregnant women.
you go back several decades, people actually used to think of measles like we think of chickenpox today. It's just something that everyone catches, and you go through it and you get your lifetime immunity. So it's only serious for an extreme minority of cases.
So so what are the actual numbers? Because I keep, honestly, I've been listening to these reports all week. It's been crazy, and I'll hear people saying, some will say it's 1 to 2 per 1,000 will die, or 2 to 4, per 1,000 will die. I mean, first of all, to say like 1 to 2 or 2 to 4 is such a massively different number. I mean, 1 in 1,000 and 1 in 500, which is essentially saying 1 or 2. So the way they just loosely throw these numbers around, like increasing the risk just in that term 1 or 2 by hundreds of percentage points.
I'm sorry, Dell can't do math, but luckily I can. 1 in 1,000 is 0.1%. 2 in 1,000 is 0.2%, so the difference is 1/10%. Not hundreds of percentage points. A percentage point is 1%. This is 1/10 of a percentage point.
What is the actual number? Because I'm always saying, we've been talking about 1 in 500,000 would die in America, as I remember, from the measles in 1960 before the vaccine ever arose.
In 1960, there were 450 reported measles deaths, down from 5,300 in the 1912 to 1916 time period, thankfully due to improved healthcare and better nutrition, since malnutrition can be a big cause of measles-related deaths. The population in the U.S. in 1960 was 180.7 million, so it was roughly 1 in every 400,000 people.
But from a clinical perspective, as you've looked in this, you're a pediatrician, what is the death risk of measles?
Right, so the media do inflate the death risk of measles in order to scare people. They honestly do. Where the 1 in 500 or 1 in 1,000 fatality rate comes from, that comes from the outbreak we had in 1989 through 1991. Out of all the children who came into the hospital or were sick enough to see a doctor, out of just that data set of children, about 1 in 500 died. But we know historically, previous to that, going back 4 or 5 decades, 90% of measles cases were so mild, people just stayed home.
Yes, it was, and a lot of people, mostly kids, died. In 1956 to 1960, an average of 542,000 cases were reported each year, and each year an average of 450 people died. It's the leading cause of death for things we can prevent with vaccines, and is the 8th largest cause of death worldwide. After the vaccine was introduced, the number of cases dropped. Between 2001 to 2011, only 911 cases were reported in the entire U.S. From 2003 to 2015, not one person died from it.
They knew it was a harmless childhood disease, and they're familiar with it, so they just stayed at home. They didn't even ever tell their doctor. There's only about 10% of people who got sick enough to seek medical care. So that's the data set they use to calculate today's fatality rate. But if you included all children who catch measles, when it goes around an entire population, the fatality rate honestly is only about 1 in every 10,000 children who catch it. And then the number 1 in 500,000, Del, that comes from, if you consider measles going through a whole population of adults and children, in which some adults do catch it. If you consider the entire U.S. population back in the 50s and 60s, the measles fatality rate was only about 1 in 500,000 Americans.
In 1960, it was estimated over 90% of people contracted the disease before age 15. In 1960, there were 180.7 million Americans, as I stated earlier. If we use an inflated percentage of, say, 95% and using 450 deaths per year at the time, since deaths don't go unreported, we get an average of 1 death every 380,000 people. So your math is off. But why should we tolerate any deaths? As I stated, from 2003 to 2015, the U.S. had 0 deaths from measles. 0.
But those numbers don't scare people. And in the media, I'm sorry, if you don't believe this, but they do this all the time. They have to use the worst number they can get a hold of in order to scare people.
So they're just taking the extreme cases, they're taking that group of extreme cases that ended up in a hospital, and amongst those extreme cases, they can say 1 in 500 will die. So they're cooking the books, essentially.
Correct.
And, I was thinking about that because I was looking. I did my investigation into this too because I really want to know. I mean, here on the HighWire, I want to make sure that we're medically accurate. Nothing I'm saying is conjecture. We base all of the things that we discuss here on published science. You know what struck me that I never thought about before is that measles was then, the death rate of measles was 1 in 10,000 children back in 1960 before we ever had a vaccine. And we think this vaccine was so great. But that's exactly the same number that we were describing autism at that same time.
Please tell me this moron's not going to link vaccines to autism. I haven't been playing anti-vax bingo this whole video.
We were also saying, back in the 60s, 70s, even early 80s, the assumption was that autism was about 1 in 10,000, which really meant we don't know what it is. It's such a small number, it's almost non-existent, but we kind of just say 1 in 10,000 have autism. And not that, I'm going to do a show to link these two, but we're still at 1 in 10,000 who are getting, who would die of the measles, but our autism rate has skyrocketed to, I like to use the New Jersey number of 1 in 32 children. I think if we were accurately, listing all the children with autism the way they're doing New Jersey, they're a little bit more precise about it.
First he says he won't link the two, but he links the two multiple times in the same rant.
What a dope. What a maroon.
We know vaccines don't cause autism. It's been studied thoroughly. The only link ever proposed was one discredited paper that required the doctor in question to pay 12 kids with autism for blood samples at birthday parties and falsify his data. Why? Because he was developing a new competitor to the MMR vaccine and wanted to discredit it so he could have his be the primary vaccine. I mean, fuck, people like you are often making claims about Big Pharma, but the whole anti-vax movement is based on the kind of stuff you think happens all the time. Shady research trying to make people rich.
In exactly 5 days, we will be $100 billion richer.
However, unlike that conspiracy theory, in reality, researchers debunked and discredited the man behind that research and revoked his medical license for his shady practices.
So we're at 1 in 32, but I'll go ahead and give you the CDC's numbers at like 1 in 36 or 1 in 45. Those are terrifying numbers. I mean, that's a terrifying climb from 1 in 10,000. So when people say to me, this great vaccine, and then you look at the hundreds of thousands of parents around the world that are blaming that very vaccine for the regression into autism.
They blame it for autism because twits like you keep spreading this myth. Autism is something you're born with, either as a genetic problem or a developmental problem while in the womb. You don't notice its effects until the child develops, as it's a developmental disorder. It's sort of in the name. Since MMR vaccines are given as early as 12 to 15 months, and children only start to talk from 18 to 24 months, you wouldn't know if your child was autistic at the time the vaccine was given to them. In fact, you generally can't test for it very well until the kid's 2 years old.
I mean, these things, and whether or not, no matter how you look at it, isn't it shocking that we're screaming with our hair on fire about like 30 people in Washington who, by the way, all chose to get the measles? I think they're perfectly happy getting the measles, just like I would in my family. I would love it if my kids would get the measles, so they'll have lifelong immunity. They'll be able to rush in to any place that's having a measles outbreak and help out. Whereas people that have only been vaccinated, they have to be terrified, right?
Wrong.
They and you can have the same effect of lifelong immunity with a vaccine without the risk, low as it might be, of dying, you dipshit. And why would a vaccinated person be terrified? They're immune. The only people who need to be terrified are those not immune, those who couldn't be vaccinated due to health issues and are reliant on herd immunity.
So I just think the numbers...
Right. Yeah, but I think it's interesting that Washington is declaring a state of emergency over 35 cases of measles, when in the entire United States, no children have died of measles, in the last, 15 years. The last childhood fatality we had was in 2003. So, but what fatalities we have had is we've had fatalities from the actual measles vaccine. The CDC collects data on severe reactions to all vaccines, and they've actually received 449 reports of fatal reactions to the MMR vaccine, and in the last 15 years there have been over 100 of these fatal reactions to the MMR vaccine, with 0 fatalities in children from the measles disease.
Now, to be fair, his numbers are fairly accurate. Using the VAERS system, the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System, you can look up all vaccine-related deaths. I did this request from 1990 to 2019. In this time period, roughly 2,840 people have died from a reaction to a vaccine. That's roughly 98 per year on average, and that number has been dropping. In 2018, there was a total of 69 deaths from vaccines. Yet, earlier, I pointed out 1 in every 400,000 people died of the disease prior to heavy immunization due to vaccines. So if we use that number in 2018, when the population of the US was close to 327 million people, you could expect a death toll of roughly 817, roughly 12 times the number who actually died from vaccines. Vaccines reduce the mortality rate. It's not perfect, but as medicine progresses, we can screen people who are susceptible to vaccine complications and avoid giving them the vaccine. And the rest of us who are immune will shield them from the disease. Given time, the mortality rate can be completely eliminated. Hell, the one confirmed death of measles in 2015, which broke the United States no-death streak, was an elderly vaccinated woman who had a compromised immune system and caught measles late in life. She was on drugs to suppress her immune system when she caught the disease and died of the resulting pneumonia caused by it. There could be 0 deaths from this disease and 0 from vaccines, but not if people like you spread misinformation like you do, which is why I'm here to debunk your horseshit.
And where's the state of emergency of that? I feel like the CDC, I mean, I imagine they're sitting there with these data on their desk and they see this pile of, 100 or, 450 people having fatal reactions to the measles vaccine. And then they have just on this other side, in the last, 16 years, 1 child dying of measles disease. What do they do with those data? Why are they just sitting on that? If there's a state of emergency, I'd say we need to try to figure out why more people are having fatal reactions to a vaccine than they are from the very disease that the vaccine is trying to prevent.
Because there are few, if any, cases of measles anymore, thanks to vaccines, you moron.
Uh-oh, retard alert! Retard alert, class!
From 2010 to 2018, there were 1,958 reported cases of measles. The disease has been mostly stamped out in the developed world, but sadly, when people tell their audience it's okay to get measles, we get spikes like in 2014, where there was a sudden spike of 667 reported cases. But compare that to the number of vaccines. In 2015, 1.3% of kids hadn't received vaccinations, according to this report by the Washington Post. I left a link to it and the related CDC article in the description. That means 98.7% had, but according to the VAERS report, only 92 people died of vaccine complications. Assuming 98.7% of the population is vaccinated, despite the fact that's the low estimate due to a sudden drop in vaccinations, we can take 98.7% of the US population in 2015 and we get around 317 million. Divide by 92 and we find there is 1 death in every 3.4 million people, which is a lot lower than the 1 in 380,000 we estimated earlier for measles deaths in 1960. MMR vaccines are over 8 times safer than getting the measles virus alone by these numbers. Now, keep in mind, VAERS isn't tracking complications from just the MMR vaccines, but all vaccines. That means all vaccines combined are over 8 times safer than just measles. That's not counting all the diseases these vaccines protect against. So my estimate of 8 times safer than measles is actually extremely low.
Right, and you're talking about deaths, and we're not even talking about all of the adverse reactions and autoimmune diseases that are coming, from the vaccine that are reported too into the thousands. But so I want to ask you this. I read somewhere, and I couldn't find it exactly, but the World Health Organization, we've said that we've eradicated measles, and I remember seeing that there's actually a threshold of the amount of cases in a country that can occur and still consider it eradicated. They're trying to say that there's this rise in measles because of the unvaccinated community.
Right.
But really, the unvaccinated community is sort of for the most part, has a stasis from the moment the smallpox vaccine came in. People have been against vaccinating, and ever since then, there's really, it doesn't change a lot. But my question is this: is 30 cases, or even in the case of Disneyland, which I think was somewhere in the 130 to 160 range, isn't that an acceptable amount to still say that even in a fully vaccinated population, you're going to see these cycles through the years?
Right. Well, Del, when there is a media agenda, and when big medicine and big pharma are trying to get everyone to comply with a medical agenda, you have to have fear. You have to scare people into being compliant. So you have to tell them, number one, measles is dangerous and it's going to kill everybody, and that's not true.
Measles is more dangerous than vaccines. This is a fact. I just demonstrated it with numbers. The same numbers you're referencing seemingly, but not bothering to look at the implications of because of your own agenda. We also know this is because the vaccine contains the virus itself. You as a doctor should know how vaccines are made. The MMR vaccine, which covers measles, mumps, and rubella, contains a weakened version of each virus. They lab grow these viruses to be much weaker than the normal virulent strain a person might catch in everyday life. Vaccines were first developed combating smallpox when it was noticed by Edward Jenner that milkmaids who contracted cowpox, a less virulent offshoot strain of smallpox, became immune to smallpox. The MMR vaccine does something similar, creating weak offshoots of mumps, measles, and rubella and infecting you with those so you become immune to the more dangerous version. These weakened versions are generally so weak you don't develop much in the way of symptoms. Side effects are generally fever, a rash, pain where the injection went in, and or stiffness of joints in older patients. They also add other components to the MMR vaccine, such as sugar and albumin, a human blood component. They also add neomycin as an antibiotic to keep stray germs from growing in the vaccine itself. Neomycin rarely causes allergic reactions, so it's the tamest antibiotic to use. They also add gelatin as a stabilizer. When you get the vaccine, your body learns to fight the weakened strain, which develops antibodies to protect you from the more virulent version, making you as immune as if you had actually had full-blown measles. Most complications from a vaccine are caused by the weakened viruses themselves in people with compromised immune systems. The vaccine by its components is safer than the diseases themselves, unless you think sugar, human blood, gelatin, and antibiotics cause autism. I mean, half the ingredients listed are found in jams or Jell-O. If you think Jell-O can cause autism, then I'm sorry, I can't help your level of stupid.
How do you make Jell-O? Just mix it with water and let it sit.
Oh, and I almost forgot, I got another tick on my anti-vax bingo card. Big Pharma! Yes! The problem is that the media aren't working for Big Pharma. They get money from advertisers and subscription fees. One site I found had the CEO of Time Warner, the company behind CNN, quoting about 50% of their income being subscription fees and the other 50% advertising. But who are the advertisers? Not vaccines. Now, I'm not a US citizen, so maybe others will have different experiences, but name the last time you saw an advertisement during CNN for MMR vaccines. In general, vaccines are marketed to doctors, and the doctors aren't advertising on the news either. There is little, if any, financial reason. The MMR vaccines in the US are generally provided by Merck & Co., and their products are mostly vaccines and autoimmune treatments, though they do sell products like Zetia.
In my restaurant, I like to serve what I like to eat. Meals that are fresh, healthy, and different. And when I found out my cholesterol was still up a little, my doctor told me about a different kind of cholesterol medicine, Zetia.
Now, how much do you think Merck spends on ads? Well, in 2014, Merck was number 8 in the top 10 list on Fierce Pharma, spending $205.5 million on advertising. This is actually down from 2007, as this same site stated in a previous top 13 article, where they spent $751.8 million. They are spending less and less every year on ads, so there is little, if any, reason for news networks to try and please Big Pharma to pay them to scare the public. Invoking Big Pharma as a boogeyman doesn't support your narrative.
And the reality is, as you just said, if you look at the measles numbers over the last 10 years or so, you'll see measles is not on the rise. It's cyclical. We had a high year about 5 years ago of about 600 cases. Then we've had a few low years.
Holy fuck, you're using the same charts. He's reading the same data and charts I am when I research this. Shit, how are you this stupid and get your degree? Seriously, who gave this man a diploma? Now, I could go on with this video, but it's just more of the same. They keep using official numbers to try and claim measles is safe and vaccines are a problem, so that if you look up the numbers, you might go, hey, these numbers are accurate, what they say must also be. But it's not the numbers that's the issue, it's the conclusion. And the only way they can make this claim is by getting a pediatrician on the show who has been so discredited that he has to be supervised during his job to ensure he isn't harming children to appear as their medical expert. And an uneducated twit like me can figure out all the flaws in their bullshit in an hour or so looking this shit up. And it's also really telling that when I spent over an hour researching this, I find the same charts and information they do. This so-called expert seemingly only did about an hour's worth of research to do this, Googling this stuff on the internet. He's no more an expert than I am. Anyways, that's it for me. If you enjoyed this video, remember to mash those like, share, and subscribe buttons. If you enjoyed this content or have requests for future videos, remember to leave me a comment or send me a message on Facebook and Twitter. And as always, I will see you next time.